Welcome to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. I am your host, Emmy DeGrappa. Wyoming is called the Equality State because we were the first to give women the right to vote. 150 years later, we wonder what Wyoming women think about the progress toward equality now. Let's find out, and thank you for listening. Today, we are talking to Becca Steinhoff. She is the executive director of Wyoming Kids First. Becca grew up in Lingle, Wyoming in Goshen County, a small Wyoming town. She is now living in Casper with her husband and her 4-year-old daughter. Welcome, Becca.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. What's it like to grow up in a small town in Goshen County?
Looking back, I think now I have fonder memories of it than I may have at the time. But my heart is still drawn to small communities in Wyoming. There's something really wonderful about being in a place where communities recognize and value people as individuals. You know everyone. You're recognized by name and by face and by family. And so there's something really great about that. I think it gave me a lot of space to be an individual and to discover and to really learn. So it was great. Love small communities.
Did you grow up on a ranch or a farm, or what was that?
Yeah, I didn't live inside city limits until I moved into the residence halls at the University of Wyoming. So I did. I grew up in kind of wide open spaces with a lot of breathing room. So I was also the old Wyoming way, not living in town, but near it. And that was great. Big yellow school bus, long ride into school every day. But
is your family still there?
Yes. My parents still are there.
Oh, wow. And what was your decision to go on and pursue a higher education?
I loved my 4 years very much at the University of Wyoming, but was ready for a big adventure. So I moved the thousands of miles to Washington, D.C., partially because of the degree that I wanted to study. Public administration made a lot of sense for Washington, D.C., but I was really looking for something to push me outside of my comfort zone, to grow and to learn, and to have, again, that freedom and open space to discover who I was and what I wanted to do. And so it was a great opportunity at a time in my life when I was able and willing to take it.
And what brought you back to Wyoming?
2 years in the big city was a lot. And so by the end of that, I found myself maybe thinking a little more fondly of Wyoming than I had before I left. And as many things as I really enjoyed and the great opportunities I had in the city, there were a lot of things about Wyoming that I really missed. Mm-hmm. And a lot more reasons, I think, to call this my home. And so of course, you have to have a job when you leave graduate school. And so as I was looking at jobs and considering opportunities, I had some great advice from mentors who suggested that I think not just about the job that I would take immediately but also about the job that I would want in the long run. And so I knew in the long run that my heart was still back in Wyoming, and this is where I wanted to be to raise a family and to really put down roots. And so it was an easy choice to come back. I had a job that was waiting for me that I was excited about, and certainly was happy to be back among family and friends.
Was that with Wyoming Kids First? Was that your first job back from D.C.?
That wasn't my first job, but it was close. So it was the second one back. So
tell me about Wyoming Kids First. Tell me about what that organization does.
Yeah, so Wyoming Kids First was started more than a decade ago, and it really was to sit in the space of early childhood. And it's taken on a lot of forms over the course of those years, but we work prenatally through age 8 to build a system in Wyoming that supports children and families so that all children have the foundation they need for later learning, behavior, and health. So we get to sit at the nexus of science and brain science, what we know is happening in the incredible first few years of life for children, and then also at community and say, and what do we know is really happening in Wyoming, and how do we ensure that we're honoring science and putting families as that first and most important guide and teacher and getting to the positive outcomes we want for our children. So a lot of my work happens in two simultaneous ways. One is to work with communities to identify a comprehensive vision for their early childhood work, and to create that vision that they want for all of the young children in their area. And then the second role is really to work at the state level and to consider the systems level work that happens for early childhood, and to be an advocate for young children who don't have a voice quite yet at some of those higher levels. So two great processes, and get to connect the dots between them, all on behalf of our youngest children.
Oh, wow. That's exciting. Do you feel that there is a great impact made by your organization across Wyoming?
I certainly hope so. There isn't anything that I don't want for my own daughter that I don't want for all children in Wyoming. And I think we have some really intentional work that can be done to improve the first few years of life for children, to maximize the outcomes of those earliest years. And so I think we have some great people who are doing that work, and there's still more to be done. But I think we've done a lot to advocate for them, and certainly working with individuals who are on the ground in the trenches carrying out that work every day is really important. And so I look forward to spending time among them when I can.
Do you see bilingual education changing what that looks like in each community as our population changes?
Absolutely. I think that is of critical importance. And I think the sooner that we can have some of those conversations about what education needs to look like in the earliest years, so before children ever set foot in that classroom, in that kindergarten classroom, I think the better off we will be. And we know actually just from brain science that children's brains pick up language and a whole host of other knowledge and skills much better in those earliest years. And so the sooner that we can start to embed those dual languages and that immersion in different culture, the stronger off the outcome will be for the kids later on. So my hope is that we can not just look at that level of education when children set foot in that K-12 classroom, but that we'll really be honoring the great work that's happening in those even tinier brains, and that will give them an opportunity to get started early on to build that foundation they need.
How does working in your field, working across Wyoming in all the different counties and communities, is it different as a woman than you think it would be for a man in your position?
That's a great question. My field of choice is sort of nebulous. I got into this work not because I knew anything about early childhood, and in fact knew very little, but because I wanted Wyoming to be the best place to live, work, play, and raise a family. And so I think in that sense, the common vision is shared by a much broader audience. And so that's a really wonderful piece. The early childhood piece, I think, is inherently more difficult because as a society, we tend to think about the earliest years as a time for families and primarily mothers. And so I think it's a new role to start engaging fathers and men in those early childhood years, which are inherently personal to women as well. But I think we are called to care about other people's children. And until as a state, as a society, we can look more deeply at how we're caring about other people and other people's children, then we have some work to do. And I think intuitively that comes easier to women. And the work that I'm doing in communities is primarily with women. So I think we have a lot of questions to ask about why that is, and what we can do to engage people across genders and across society into this work.
Do you think the majority of people who work in early childhood education are female?
Unequivocally, yes.
So maybe the equality question isn't quite the same as if you worked in the oil and gas field.
Correct. Yeah.
I think the bigger question is, do you vote?
Absolutely. Every time.
Every time. Okay. And do you think your right to vote gives you a voice as a woman in our state?
I think the right to vote does give me a voice. I think collectively we still have some work to do on what true equality looks like. And I go back and forth as a woman myself. Do we celebrate the fact that Wyoming was the first state to allow women to vote, regardless of the intention? Should we just celebrate and salute the fact that we were the first, even though we have a lot of work to do? And I think there is some celebration that needs to happen there. Meanwhile, we need to not stop the work that propels us forward and that compels us to celebrate and salute the women who are engaged and trying to create change in a different way.
Since you've been back in Wyoming and until now, have you seen a change for women in the workforce, especially in your job? Do you see more women going back to work, needing early childhood care for their kids?
Yes. We have. We know that about 70% of children in Wyoming have all parents in the workforce, which is a huge number. And so the reality for almost 3/4 of our children is that they have all parents in that workforce, mom or dad or both, are out of the home and working every day. And so we have a great need as communities to build the system that supports those families and supports those children so that those parents can be contributing employers to our economy and to our communities. So there's a lot of compelling work to do in that area.
Well, and since it's early childhood education, you probably get to see a lot of young families.
Yes.
And their children. And do you see them, well, first of all, can they afford childcare? I think that's a huge concern for people because even though you need two incomes, by the time you go to work and get home and pay your bills, did you really accomplish something?
Absolutely. There's a huge trade-off between having one income or two incomes and having a significant portion of that go to childcare. By federal standards, childcare in the state of Wyoming is unaffordable. And so the percentage that it is of our annual median income is very high. And so we have a lot of work to do to consider the quality of that care and education and also the affordability of that. Since we know that having that placement in out-of-home care is a reality for most families, we need to be really thoughtful about what that looks like. And that's part of the system that we work on with Wyoming Kids First.
And how do you get men involved? How do you get them, aware of their part that they should be paying attention to in early childhood education for their children?
A lot of it has been just increasing knowledge for parents as well. I think historically, we have very few parenting classes and few opportunities for individuals to learn about what it means to be a parent and what happens in little brains in those earliest years of life. And so we have a real opportunity to engage parents of all ages and all genders to know more about what those earliest years really look like and to help them make the most of those opportunities. I know that I certainly have approached parenting differently after having been now in this early childhood field for nearly 10 years than I would have prior to that. So I think we really have to come alongside families and parents and help them understand what a gift those early years are and how they can make the most of those learning opportunities with their youngest children. And I think there are a lot of things that we need to do in just changing kind of cultural stigmas maybe for men. There's so much about early childhood that is, giggling and talking in your high voice and making things really big and exciting. And I think sometimes men don't feel like they can be silly and that they can really engage in the way that we're typically engaging with very young children. And so we have a lot of work to do to support them in that space too, to really own their experience in those earliest years and be able to step outside of that shell that we tend to put them in and to really just seize the moment with their children.
So what generation ranching family are you in Lingle?
Let's see. In Wyoming, I guess we also have a family ranch outside of Newcastle. And so I've spent a lot of time there, both growing up and now. And so I would be 6th generation in that family. So
wow. And that's what kind of made me think about what you were saying. Is there unspoken rules between men and women on a ranch?
There are.
Like what?
I think the unspoken rule there gets, unfortunately, back to some of the stereotypes that we all imagine. Women are inside and they're making the meal and sweeping the floors and getting the dishes done and caring for the children, and men are outside caring for livestock and irrigating fields and driving the tractor. And there are some true things about that. And then, at the same time, I think I grew up in a family of all girls. So I have 4 sisters. And no brothers. And my dad made sure that, we could all drive the tractor and change a tire on a car and identify tools in the shop, and do what needs to be done. So I think we're getting a little bit better at some of that, but there are some really difficult things that we have to tackle. And I think part of that comes back to women owning our experience as well. There aren't very many things that I want to be told that I can't do, or that I shouldn't be doing. And so I think we also have an obligation to really step in and own our own experience and take on roles that traditionally may not have been ours either.
Oh, great. It's been great talking to you. Thank you for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. Please join us again next week as we continue our conversations with women from around the state. You can also find us at thinkwy.org, where we continue the conversation on our blog about the history, journey, and the challenges of Wyoming's intrepid women living in the equality state. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review on iTunes. Thank you for listening.